Welcome to GovCon Unscripted, where we dive into the unfiltered stories and strategies from all around the world of government contracting. Join host Chelsea Roberts as she explores how to navigate, thrive, and win in this complex but lucrative industry.
All right. Hey, everyone, and welcome back to GovCon Unscripted. I'm your host, Chelsea Roberts, CEO of Collaborative Compositions. And today I've got with us Jerry Hollister, co-owner of BBCetc. Jerry, who are you and what do you do?
Sure. Chelsea, first of all, thanks for the invitation. It's a real pleasure to be here with you on your podcast. So BBC Entrepreneurial Training and Consulting, that's such a mouthful, we just say ETC. What we do is we provide SBIR support services for companies across the country. We're based in Michigan. However, our consultants are dispersed across the country, and we work with several economic development groups across the country to provide training and one-on-one consulting with companies that are seeking federal R&D funds. We primarily work in the SBIR, STTR world, or SBIR as it's known in some agencies. But we can also work with other federal funding mechanisms for R&D, and we do quite a bit of that as well.
Wow. So this is a very hot topic. And for those of the audience that aren't familiar with the programs, SBIR, or SBIR, stands for Small Business Innovative Research, and STTR, which is STTR, I believe is Small Business or Small Technology Transfer Research. Is that accurate? Okay, good. Got that right. So these programs, there was this heated debate about whether they were going to be reauthorized. Were they going to keep going? Are they going to still exist? And now we have some resolution with that. And so the program has been reauthorized. And you'll have to let us know, how long has that been reauthorized for?
Sure. So SBIR, SBIR, was created in 1982 under President Reagan. STTR came along 10 years later. And then the way that it works is Congress authorizes programs and then carves out a portion of the agency budgets that do R&D at a certain level. And so they can't opt out. They have to do it. But the authorization has to be renewed every few years, and it's varied between 3 to 5 to sometimes longer. Most recently, the program expired this September 30th of 20. So the previous authorization was only 3 years. It was reauthorized in 22. We're into 25. So it lasts. And there was a lot of debate within Congress on how to use this program strategically, as it has been for the last 40 plus years. And so what happened is it expired. There's efforts to change the program, update the program, make it more robust, particularly for transitioning from the early technology states, TRL, as it's known at DoD, for example, the low TRLs up to higher TRLs, and then transition to acquisition and implementation in the field, particularly at DoD. So that was the whole point of the reauthorization. So to answer your specific question, the bill was reauthorized and then signed into law by President Trump on April 13th and became public law 119-83. And so it is now reauthorized with the new changes. I'm sure we'll talk about those until September 30th of 2031. So that's
Okay.
a little over 5 years from now.
Yeah.
Initially, it was 6 years, but we lost half of a year because it was expired during that. So we got 5.5 years, which is great.
Yeah, absolutely. It sounds like it. And now, for those also not quite familiar with the program and how it works, my understanding, having worked with a couple of SBIRs and SBIR companies, is that it's a phased program, and it starts at very basic research, which is more paperwork activity than production of anything material. And it's doing studies and research and documenting those results. And then it's phased. So you've got that first phase, which is that basic paperwork research. And then that moves into a phase 2, which is then actual development of something that is considered maybe a minimum viable product. Is that right?
Yeah. So you've got it right with a couple caveats. So
Okay.
first of all, there's 11 agencies that participate in this program. DoD is by far the largest, but
Sure.
each of the 11 agencies has their own implementation of the program. So the way NSF, for example, operates their SBIR program, they call it SBIR, and the way DoD operates SBIR is very different. And even within DoD, there's 14 different components that have SBIR programs. Component meaning like Army, Navy, Air
Sure.
Force. Those are the big ones, the big three. And so they all have their own way that they implement it. So as you said, phase one is a proof of concept study. Oftentimes it is. It's a paper study. There's no real lab work, but it can be lab work. And at some of the other agencies, NIH, for example, NSF, DOE, you maybe have a lab top kind of proof of concept study that's in addition to the just a paper study. It really does depend on what the technology that the applicant company is developing, right? Or the awardee company.
Sure.
Now, the goal of phase two is to move from, yeah, it really worked, proof of concept, to, okay, now we can make it into a usable product or service. And we're going to launch an MVP at the end of phase two. So a phase two typically is about 2 years and then 1 to 2 million, depending on the agency. Like DoD, for example, a lot of times you can't get there in just 2 years and $2 million. So they have supplemental phases, there's supplemental funds that may be extended another couple of years. And now there's a new program that was just reauthorized that I'm sure you're going to ask me about that we can talk about later. But
Yes.
it's the basic 2 phases down pat.
Perfect. Now, I think that's typically where most companies are pretty familiar, or they have an easier time sort of getting through those first two. But then when we come to that phase three, that elusive, coveted, invaluable phase three, that's where things start to go a little bit different, and it's a different direction. And so my understanding is that in a phase three, there's no actual SBIR funds that are involved. And that has the funds for a phase three have to come from some other funding pot. And I think in that transition period between phase two and phase three, that is referred to as the valley of death. And that's where companies get stuck and not be able to move past that. We've got a great thing on the shelf right now, and we just need to get it into the hands of the end users and the warfighters and the folks that need to leverage the technologies. So where in this reauthorization did the phase three change? Is there any sort of subsequent effort that might have SBIR dollars involved? What does that look like now? Because the transition rates historically from phase two to phase three haven't been very good. So in trying to improve that rate or improve the transition of technologies into the hands of the end user or warfighter, what changes were made in this recent reauthorization that really address that?
First of all, you're absolutely right that moving from proof of concept into MVP and then trying to sell that MVP to the government is frankly one of many valleys of death, but it is definitely a big one. And there's several reasons for, before I answer your question, I can give some important context.
Yeah.
Keep in mind that only a couple of the SBIR agencies will actually acquire technology developed through SBIR, STTR. DoD is one of them. They are by far the biggest. NASA also regularly buys the technology that they develop through the program. Homeland Security occasionally will do that, but most of the other agencies will never be the buyer. And like NSF, NIH, DOE, maybe sometimes they're trying to change that mentality right now, but historically they never were buyers. And the smaller agencies, they don't buy. Well, let's just talk about DoD. So as the way that DoD is funded is they have a POM, which is 2 years looking forward to get in a program of record has a budget that's established a couple of years in advance. So let's say you're a SBIR awardee, you're in phase one, you just finished, you got your phase two award. So you got now 2 years to move from your proof of concept, maybe TRL 3 or 4, maybe 5, to TRL 6 or plus. So you got that 2 years, And then let's just say it's the Navy, because I'm ex-Navy. And so let's say it's the Navy and they want to put it on the submarine. You got 2 years to get it ready. There's so much that has to go into getting it ready to put on any deployable weapon system or platform like a submarine, for example. First of all, as you mentioned, the phase 3 money has to be from a non-SBIR source. So again, using this example, the submarine budget would have to do the acquisition. Let's say it's a sensor system
Sure.
for the sonar array or whatever. The new sonar sensor. That has to get into the POM. And so when you first get your award, phase 2, day 1, 2 years from now, the budget's already set. You've got 2 years, but the budget's already set for 2 years from now. So you really have to start getting into the program of record early on. Then you got to convince the program managers at that whatever program it's called, the submarine program, that this is actually something that's going to work and can work. And then you got to go through all of the quality systems, all of the ISO system. I mean, a small startup may or may not have all of the systems in place that will meet mil specs so that they can actually deploy it. So there's lots of hurdles there. And so what a lot of SBIR companies fail to realize, they have to get into the budget. They have to convince the end users basically the day that they start phase 2, or they're never going to make it. Now, what ends up happening a lot of times is the programs, the submarine programs, will maybe give an extent, they'll give a second phase 2, which is allowable under the SBIR dollars. So that maybe extends it a bit further. And then they have a bit more time to get into the budget so that they can deploy. Usually, and we just had this happen with a client of ours, relatively small company, 15, 20 people, but they got a $220 million contract to put a sensor on the submarine. It was a phase 3 award. They had gotten a phase 2 supplemental, and then they got this contract. It was a prototyping. It's still basically what this first phase 3 award did was it gave them the funds to be able to put into place all those quality systems, to do some additional shakedown before they actually put an operating fleet submarine. So that's some reasons why it's so difficult to get into it, to get it actually deployed. Now, to your question. So the newest reauthorization does 2 things aimed at trying to help that transition rate. The first is the law has always allowed a contracting officer. I was a contracting officer for DOD 30 plus years ago. But the authority, ever since President Reagan signed it, has given a contracting officer the ability to make a sole source award to a SBIR awardee to buy their goods or services. Most contracting officers don't know that, or they're afraid to do it because, wait a minute, I don't like doing sole source awards. That's what gets me in trouble. That's why I lose my warrant, all those kind of things. So they're risk averse in that sense. So what the law, the new reauthorization says is we're going to provide, the agencies must provide training on this authority, how to implement it. It's not going to get you in trouble, and you're not going to lose your warrant. Those kinds of trainings to try to ease that, even just bureaucratic logjam. Okay. And so that's one thing. The second thing is the new reauthorization allows for what's called a strategic breakthrough award. And what this does is it, using SBIR dollars, they can go up to $30 million on a phase 2 supplemental award.
Wow.
But it has to come out of the SBIR budget. So historically, the agencies had a phase 1 cap and a phase 2 cap. And right now, the phase 2 cap is $2.2 million.
Okay.
The agencies have the ability to go to SBA, Small Business Administration, and ask for permission to give higher awards historically. And a few have done that, and they've been able to get that authority and bigger awards. With the point being, look, we want to transition this, but we need more money, and it's not in the budget yet. So now we got a gap. And so they get stuck in a valley of death. And so this new authority gives the agencies the ability, well, 5 agencies, not all the agencies, just the 5 agencies, the authority to go up to 30 million without having to go to SBA and say, Mother, may I?
Okay.
And it does require a 1-to-1 match. So if, let's say, Army, Navy, Air Force wants to make this, they want to get this sensor, they need more development. It's not in the palm yet for the submarine budget, but the SBIR dollars, they want to put another, let's call it 20 million to get them to the point where then they can make a phase 3 award.
Sure.
Then they don't have to go get permission. But the company has to go find this 20 million to match the 20 million that the Navy's going to kick in.
Interesting.
Key things about strategic breakthrough, maybe you're asking. So I'll just leave it at that.
So I definitely will be asking, but to take it back just a quick step. So there are other programs that kind of sound like they might resemble this. And I know them as strategic financing, StratFi and
StratFi, TACFi, and StratFi were the model for this new strategic breakthrough. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, great. So that at least gives me some confidence that this isn't going to be a uncommon thing that they're going to be unwilling to try out because it's new and it's not been done before. So it sounds like the groundwork's been laid for a change like this for some time now. Now, with that strategic breakthrough funding, if you've got matching funds, do those have to come from commercial? Does it matter? Can they be from anybody? Can they be from a government agency that's also interested in seeing this move forward? How does that work?
Yes. Yeah, great question. And really good history too. And yes, as you mentioned, StratFi, which was an Air Force program, started about 5 years ago. And what they did, we went to SBA and said, hey, can we get permission to make these larger awards? And SBA gave them the permission to do. So that's, so now they don't have to do that unless they want to go over 30 million.
Sure.
Then they'd have to ask for permission. So yes, the program has been around a little, only Air Force was doing it prior, but now DOD, DOE, Energy, and NASA and NIH have the ability to make these strategic breakthroughs. The other agencies don't. So the matching funds, to your question, is it could come from private VC, private equity, angel. It could come from another award or another government funding pot of money, not SBIR, can't be SBIR money. Important other detail is strategic breakthrough is a phase 2 supplemental program.
Okay.
Just like StratFi and TACFi,
Right.
just like there's several programs that already existed, several of the agencies that were, you get the initial phase 2 and then you can get a supplemental phase 2 awards. This is just another one of those. Meaning that the company that's going to be seeking a strategic breakthrough award has to already have a phase 2 award. Okay. They can't just apply for strategic funding.
Okay.
Strategic breakthrough funding. They won't exist that way.
Sure.
And also important misconception, because I read all these posts, and there's 2 big misconceptions. One, it's just going to be, oh, it's a new program, strategic breakthrough. No, it's a supplemental phase 2 award. Second, it doesn't open up new funding. So it's got to come out of the existing budgets. My personal prediction on this is I'd be surprised to see more than one in a whole year of they're at 30 million. What I do think is going to happen is you'll see a lot more supplemental awards in 3 to 5, 10 million ranges. Because again, you got to remember, it's going to come out of the budget, the agency budget. Right. And so, for example, NSF has a $250 million annual budget for SBIR. They made one $25 million award. That's just 10% of their budget right there. Boom, gone. So that's not really their model. They said they're considering it, and they already have a matching program. They have a phase 2B program. It requires the 1-to-1 management. So I think they might extend that. And I think that's probably what's going to happen with a lot of these agencies. Instead of being maybe 1 to 2 million supplemental awards, they may go a bit higher. But I don't think they're going to go to 30 million because only a couple budgets would even support that. Air Force, Army, Navy, maybe DARPA. Missile defense, they also got a lot of money.
So with this additional opportunity for funds for companies, it didn't come with additional funds on the budget for the agencies. Pity. That's just a shame.
Yeah. Again, all it did is it gave the agency the ability to make larger awards out of the existing pot of money without getting permission.
Okay.
That's really all it changed. It
Okay.
also has some matching requirements, and like can come from different pots of money. That match has to
Sure.
come from different pots of money, but that's really the only change.
Interesting. Interesting. Now, to just pivot a little bit and take us back to companies that are getting into the SBIR program or companies that have been a part of the SBIR program. I think one of the big highlights and one of the favorite aspects of both the SBIR and SITR programs is that, at least historically, have been fairly predictable in terms of like release schedules and when you're going to see these things like the topics come out, right? I think it was quarterly, was it? I think it was quarterly, right?
Historically, DoD had 3 releases per year.
Okay, so
Now they've changed.
yeah,
Yeah.
so now they've changed that. And previously they used to release their schedule, their planned release schedule in advance so companies could prepare because let's all remember these are FAR-based contractual activities and they have that limitation of time in which you can engage with the points of contact. So once the question and answer period has closed, you are no longer able to communicate openly with the technical points of contact or the contracting folks. And that has historically been a point of frustration and limiters because if you find out about it towards the end or after the Q&A period has ended, you're immediately at a disadvantage because you didn't get the opportunity to engage with those customers. So I think there was a lot of appreciation there for the forecastability of these things. Like, we're going to expect it to come out now. We're going to expect to ask those questions. We're going to expect to cut off communication and then get our submission in. But that has changed from what I have seen. So I think you were saying the other day that these things are coming out monthly now. Is that correct?
Yes, at DoD.
Okay.
Keep in mind, 11 different agencies, but at DoD, yes, they have now gone to a monthly, the first Wednesday of every month. All the participating components have the ability to issue new topics.
Okay.
They're still going to be primarily centered around which historically was like they would drop topics in October, they drop topics in February, and they drop topics in like June. That was typically their cycle. You'll still see some of those, but I think over time they'll even out to more consistent across every month. There's going to be, I don't know, 50 versus.
Sure. Wow.
Like when President Trump signed the bill on April 13th, within 2 hours, DOD issued 120 topics. Boom, just like that. Okay, because they were waiting. Everybody was waiting, and everybody knew that it was on his desk. So everybody was getting ready to hit the go button, and DOD did. And several of the other agencies issued their solicitations as well. As you mentioned, the way that DOD and most of the agencies work is because they're FAR-based contract awards, there's an open period, a pre-solicitation period where there can be this dialogue,
Right.
private dialogue. Let's say you were the program director. I can call you up and I have the person one-on-one meeting. And when the solicitation is open, so that period is usually 3 to 4 weeks, then when the solicitation hits the street or opens, then one-on-one communication is cut off. Now, there is a way to ask questions still. On the submission portal website called DSIP, Defense SBIR, STTR, something IP. Anyway, DSIP. You can go in and ask a question. Now, the downside of that is I ask the question to you, you're the program officer, TPOC, and then everybody in the world that wants to look at it can see my question and whatever response you give. If it's a silly question, there's no harm, but you definitely don't want to give away some of your kind of proprietary thoughts about how to solve the problem that they're asking about in the topic. But there's still an ability to ask questions, but the downside is everybody sees the question and everybody sees the answer. Now, the granting agencies don't have that limitation. Because it's grant-based. It's not FAR. It's 2 CFR 200 that is the authority that they can these awards. And the granting rules, and an applicant can call up the NSF or NIH or DOE program staff the day before the thing is going to be due and they can have a discussion. They probably won't, but they're not precluded from doing that.
Okay.
And so the rules vary by the agency. And every agency is a little different how they handle.
Yeah, there are definitely some quirks between different agencies, the way that they go about
Lots.
doing things, their processes. Yeah, that can oftentimes get people a little confused, a little bit misled, misguided.
Totally.
Yeah.
I did a DOD and this is how I did it. And I'm like, no, don't do it that way. And it's that we're going to go well. So yeah,
Okay.
for sure.
So this monthly release thing, do
Yep.
you see this continuing? Is this something that we're going to see, or is this just because they were on pause for a while and they all have that money to get out and this is going to end at the end of the year and then they'll go back to their typical cycle? What's your prediction on that?
No, firmly believe, because I've heard people say, but look, this is the direction we're going.
Okay.
And the reason is it levels things out from a workload standpoint for all these components, right? They're working on it more continually versus these three big hunks per year. And I think the other thing is the components were already headed that direction before the pause or lapse of authorization last September. And the whole reason is they want to be able to get the topics out just in time as soon as they need it. They don't want to wait 6 months for the next topic release. They want to get it out now because they want the solution sooner. And there's been a big effort within DoD to shorten the times from author kind of writing up a topic to when it gets onto the street and get solutions start coming in. So I absolutely believe that's going to be the model going forward, at least at DoD. And some of the other agencies, at the granting agencies, it's not that big a deal because topics don't really change, right?
Sure.
I mean,
Yeah.
the NCI, the National Cancer Institute at NIH, the topic doesn't change. Give us solutions to cancer, right? And so they just have their regular deadlines and can plan on that. And NSF, same thing. They got these wide open. If you got a science problem or it's going to solve an important problem, or you got a new technology, just send it to us and we'll evaluate. Doesn't matter when it is, send it whenever. So the granting agencies, they could plan on it still. But
Sure.
it's a DoD, though, that has very specific topics that don't recur, right? Go back to my submarine sensor example. They need a sensor that's got to do A, B, C, and D. They need that. It's a specific problem. The topic is very specific. It's not like they're asking for just, hey, give us your ideas about sensors. And then, that's not how they work.
Yeah.
They say, we need a sensor that can do A, B, C, and D. And that topic, once it's issued, they'll usually issue 3 to 5 phase 1 awards. They'll see who does the best. They'll down select for phase 2, maybe make 1 or 2 awards for phase 2. And then we already talked about how you get from phase 2 to phase 3 and that whole.
Sure.
But then they got a solution for this problem and they're going to keep issuing topics for that. And so that's the difference between the different agencies, is how they use the program to achieve mission goals.
And they also use it to address some of the urgent requirements or things that have cropped up, especially within the new and emerging technologies realm.
Oh, for sure.
And for companies that are just starting to become aware of or just get interested in SBIR work, and say they probably have heard a mixed bag of great stories, horror stories, and everything in between about the program. What do you advise companies that are just now, and has that changed with this latest reauthorization? Is there any other new advice that you're giving or preparing differently or helping them just get familiar with it in a different way since it's had some of these changes?
Yeah, most of the changes are not going to directly affect how the companies are going to approach the program.
Okay.
There's 2 other changes that are more or less significant to the applicant, right? I mentioned the whole phase 3, but that applies to the training for the contract, but that applies to the agencies. One thing that has changed is it's called the foreign influence disclosures. So now all companies have to disclose any foreign influence that they have in the application process.
Okay.
And then the agencies have a responsibility to then check against 8 different lists that the law, the legislation, the authorization states that the agencies must check against these lists. and Commerce has a list, and DoD has a list. So anyway,
Sure.
there's all these lists. So a company needs to be aware that if they have foreign investors, if they have foreign collaborators, if they have foreign ownership, they're going to have to disclose that. Now, it's not going to necessarily make them unawardable. It will depend. The agencies now have to make a determination whether there's a risk in making this award. The risk meaning, is this new technology, this new intellectual property going to disappear overseas because of this influence, right? And so that is something that the companies need to start thinking about and planning for. We're developing a tool to help assess the risk so that companies can go into it understanding what the risks are.
Sure.
And again, it's going to depend on like DoD is going to be much more stringent about the foreign witness than maybe say NIH or NSF. They're going to evaluate it, and they don't want to see technology going overseas either, but it's a little bit less sensitive.
Sure.
Right. Versus something that could be classified for warfighters. They should be aware of.
And the reason for that change was a hot topic and of much debate, I think, at least within Congress when they were doing the reauthorization. And I think it was based on this concept or this idea that we could be leaking technology into the hands of not necessarily the nicest countries and foreign organizations and entities, meaning we could inadvertently be leaking technology into the hands of our adversaries. And is that why they were trying to address that leakage of technology?
Yes. I mean, short answer is yes.
Yeah.
The longer answer is there's lots of places where we live in a free and open society. And that's one of the greatest things about our country for the last 250 years, right? Is free and open. And the downside of that is you could theoretically be losing intellectual property and some of the secrets. And it's a double-edged sword, right? The benefits of it is we're not in an authoritarian regime where there's no freedom of expression and all that. And what the downside is, you could lose that. I think one of the bigger leakages, my personal opinion, you didn't ask my opinion, but here it comes, is that the universities are probably much more where the whole mantra at universities is to publish. When a professor publishes basic research data, it's out there, right? And if that basic research data then leads to, let's say it's a new tactical sensor for the submarine, that's already out there. And so even if the small business, I think the other thing is, it was a hard argument because they're like, yeah, we don't want to give away all of our secrets. But why are you forcing the small businesses? They're 3, 4, 10, 20, even 50 or 100 people. They don't have the capacity to do all these protections and foreign influence and all that. The big companies, the Raytheons, the Boeings, they have moles and leaks all over the place. And they're the ones that really get targeted. Small businesses don't generally get targeted. But it was a hard argument to me. They're like, well, why are you picking on the small guy? Let's deal with these other issues like the universities and like the big private contractors. But in the end, the legislation is what it is. And now small businesses are going to have to deal with this.
Yeah. And I think it's certainly a different burden and an increased burden to put on those small businesses, which any additional burden on a small business is not something that I'm typically in favor of. And I'm sure you're not either, but you got to weigh those factors and balance them as you can. And as we wrap up here, one of the last things I want to ask you about, and folks that have been following or have participated or have heard of the SBIR program, probably in that same sentence at some point in their conversations have heard the term SBIR mill. So with those SBIR mills, first, give us a brief explanation of what those are, and are there any changes in this new reauthorization that is intended to reduce that occurrence?
Yes, there were efforts to do that. And frankly, that was the issue that held up the reauthorization for the longest period.
Okay.
All the other issues that we've talked about, strategic breakthrough, there were several initial proposals. Most of those got ironed out within the first couple months. They were pretty much all ironed out by Christmas time. Okay, so within a couple months.
Sure.
Really, it was more like Thanksgiving. But anyway, this whole how to deal with the SBIR mills was a real issue. Now, what is a SBIR mill? It depends on who you ask, but the way that I look at these is companies that have participated and received significant amount of SBIR funding that have not had a history of converting to usable products, whether it be to DoD or to commercial, right?
Okay.
And so if they keep pulling in money, and there are some companies that have received tens and hundreds of millions of dollars through the SBIR program over the past 40 years, but they have not a great track record of commercializing technology. So what we were advocating for in the whole reauthorization effort was, instead of doing limits on how many proposals could be submitted, which is what we ended up with, what our argument was, there are some companies that have received lots of SBIR money that are doing a really good job of converting into usable products and services, whether it's for DoD or outside, right?
Sure.
NSF funded Qualcomm
Wow.
30 years ago or whatever. So that's a success, right? And that's the whole point of it. The company I came from prior to being a consultant at BBC, we pulled in 50 million or so in SBIR money, but the company hasn't taken any money in the last 3 years. It's now selling commercial products. Use the program. Were we a mill? Not by any definition, because for one, we're no longer taking the money, and two, we're selling commercial products. But there was an effort to try to make sure that the program wasn't being abused. And frankly, out of all of the big multiple award winners, there was only a few that didn't have a good track record. And what I would call, they're multiple award winners, but they were also doing great stuff for DoD and other products and services. You don't want to penalize them. So what our solution to that was, instead of saying you can't only apply for X number of proposals a year or get a certain amount of money per year, that would hurt the agencies, because let's say that DoD needed a certain technology and there was only a few companies capable of doing that, and some of them were multiple award winners. You don't want to exclude them.
Yeah.
You don't want to do that. What we proposed was having benchmarks. In other words, you have to be able to report how much SBIR money you got. And if you double that with non-SBIR funds, whether it's DoD phase 3 or an award like submarine, going to put it on the submarine, or selling commercially like Qualcomm does, as long as you're doing half of your revenue from a company, then you can take as much. It didn't work out that way. I think that would have been much better implementation, but in the end, this is better than what we had before, because it will force companies are more just kind of R&D companies and not necessarily good at launching products. It will force them to focus on the most important topics that they can then develop. And the problem was, some of those big companies were from Massachusetts, and the senator that was in charge was from Massachusetts. He wasn't going to kick off some of his, and they were big donors to his campaign. So the ugly politics of how the program got held up, but that was a real problem for several, I think at least 2 months. That was the single holdup, basically from the new year when the Congress came back to when it was finally settled, and the Senate passed it in early March, then the House passed it in mid-March, and then it sat on the president's desk for a couple of weeks. So anyway, we're back online. We don't have to rehash all the ugliness. That it is a little bit of the inside baseball.
And so the solution that they have implemented is to limit the number of proposals then that companies can submit on any given release or on any given year.
So it gets complicated. Most of the program is super complicated. It's what gives people like me a job.
Yeah.
Because it's so doggone complicated. So the law says that each agency must set a limit. They have 3 ways that they could set the limit. Option 1 is they could just say, company, we're only going to take one company or one proposal or X number of proposals per year.
Okay.
A lot of the agencies already had those kinds. So they just say, company A, you can only submit X number per year to our agency.
Okay.
Second option would be you can only submit X number per solicitation. Now, many of the agencies only have one solicitation a year, but at DoD, for example, or NSF, or some of the other ones, they may have 2 or 3 per year. And so then they'd have a limit per solicitation.
Okay.
The third way is they could limit by topic. And this is what DoD has indicated they're going to do. And this kicks in as of October 1st. It's not in close. Okay. But as of October 1st, what we expect to see from DoD is they'll say, okay, we're releasing 25 topics, only 2 per topic. Topic 2, 5. Topic 3, 1. Topic, we don't know what it's going to be. The law doesn't define X. It just says they have to define, but that's what we expect that they will do. And we don't know what that is. Be 1, it might be 5, it might be more. It depends on the topic. It gives the agency the flexibility.
Okay. And for companies out there that have questions that are like, can we do this? Should we not? Should we do this? Should we not? They can come to you all and they can ask those questions and you will happily answer them and help them in many other ways, of which I would love to hear a little bit about now. And shamelessly self-promote, please.
Sure. Yeah. So we are a consulting firm. We do charge for our services. Our engagement is very simple. We just charge by the hour. The typical engagement with us is between $2,400 and $4,000. We have a $1,000 minimum. Some of our competitors charge 5 times more per month with several monthly minimums. We don't take success fees. I don't believe in success fees. I think that hurts the small business, having come from a SBIR company. We don't do success fees. We don't take equity positions. Just charge by the hour, kind of like paying your account.
Yeah.
What we do is we'll work with companies one-on-one. The other thing we do is we can connect them to the programs funded by the Small Business Administration called the FAST program, Federal and State Technology Partnership. Basically, what FAST awardees, and there's one in 42 different states and Puerto Rico, and they're going to try to get it into all 50 states here this fall. Basically, every one of these sites, their job is to provide SBIR services to applicants.
Okay.
And either through training or one-on-one assistance or paying somebody like us to help them. So we are the FAST awardee for the state of Michigan. And we work with, I think, 30 of the FAST sites across the country. So basically what can happen is, if somebody comes to us, the first thing I'm going to ask is, what state are you in? Because we can probably find some resources that will either offset all, part, or there's a great program here that you need to talk to and get your questions answered at no cost or minimal cost. That's something we offer because we're well connected within the FAST network and within SBA's innovation network. It's a benefit to any company that's coming to us. We can usually find some resources.
That's fantastic. That's amazing. And for folks that want to get a hold of you, or they want to get more familiar with your background or your experience, and they want the insights and the guidance, how do they get a hold of you in particular?
Sure. You reach out to me, Jerry, at BBCetc.com. Just go to our website, BBCetc.com. There's a work with us. You can click on that button. There's a contact us. And we'll have an initial call. It's a no-cost call, just to kind of make sure that it's a good fit, and then go from there. But yeah, they could also look me up on LinkedIn because I do a lot of posts on LinkedIn. I don't know what that link is. Just Jerry Hollister, BBC, and you'll find me. So yeah, happy to answer questions and be a resource.
That's fantastic. We'll get all of those links, including your LinkedIn profile, in the show notes for everybody so that they can follow along. And if you're a company that's ever been curious about the SBIR or the STTR programs and you want to get involved, Jerry is the guy to talk to. Definitely reach out, have the conversation, and make sure that you're informed going into these things, because they can be complicated. And if you can save yourself time, effort, or prevent some mistakes from being made that first try, why wouldn't you, right?
Exactly.
I learned a whole lot today, and I'm sure our audience will too. So I really appreciate you being on the show, Jerry. This was a fantastic conversation, and I'm sure folks are going to get a lot from it. So really appreciate having you on the show, and I hope you have a great rest of your day and a great weekend.
Thanks. You too, Chelsea. And again, honor to be here with you.
Awesome. And thanks everyone for listening this week to GovCon Unscripted. Don't forget to share, subscribe, and do your part. Leave a heart. If you want to leave a comment, make sure that you leave that comment. We'll engage with you on any of the platforms that you're accessing the show. And make sure that you send it to a friend who wants to know more about the SBIR program. And tune in next week for the next episode of GovCon Unscripted. Thanks.
Thanks for listening to this episode of GovCon Unscripted with your host, Chelsea Roberts. Do you have a GovCon story or need guidance in government contracting? Connect with Chelsea on LinkedIn to be a guest on the show or to enhance your business strategy. Don't forget, your network is your net worth. If you liked what you heard, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with your growing GovCon community.